Okay, so welcome to our fourth event for our summer inclusion tour based on critical race theory. We're going to start off today's event with Jonathan Cabrera, instructor for criminal justice, doing a spoken word piece. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kyle. Hopefully everybody's doing well. This piece right here, I call it No Bad Energy. It's actually a rap slash spoken word. It was something that I wrote when I did a presentation for South by Southwest EDU based on the school to prison pipeline and basically addressing some of the systemic issues that exist that can lead somebody from, being in school, but then zero tolerance policies and other things end up leading to, let's say, incarceration and things of that nature. So here you go. On my ancestors' wildest dreams come into fruition. My people come from places where we have rotten conditions. According to the bureaus, I'm supposed to be a statistic. Analytics call me criminal for my birth or existence. I'm out here with a blaze, some got a Glock for resistance. I'm just trying to stay safe from shock of going ballistic. The media try to ruin us with shots of our image. They don't show us going to Harvard only, shots of ballistics. We on the front page and look like a gun range. Call a brother Thug Strange, one way smoke the cocaine. College data plug, man, they did model ball, man. We know to play sports, all state me no cage. Quick to hook a brother up a pair of state grains. People who are higher up just want to stay green. Opioid and epidemic like the crack scene, they want us to stay focal, want us to stay fiends. All these politicians just be talking, don't be walking. All this political jargon cover up many of your caucus. Never side with issues, less in need of our support. Otherwise, we up in court. If they running for a caucus genocidal, then it's suicidal. Living life on survival. Put their hand on the Bible. Office remains idle. Money remains the idle. Asking for an inch now. We never get a mile. How will people be sobbing? All of this got me throbbing. Youngest began robbing. We have no Batman and Robin. They done killed all our heroes. Memory of them zero. Homie, this here jungle and lion cycles is feral. School to prison pipeline, the pipe dreams, the bridge that got no pipelines because you were pipe fiends. Homie, on this island, dudes be wildin', you might see a lot of stuff in daytime reserved for the night scene. You see some brothers getting murdered up, homie stabbed up. You see some youngins getting jumped out, getting grabbed up, get sexually assaulted and get told to man up. And if you don't man up, then you might just hang up on everything. Everything is everything. Food calls your wedding ring. Promise your life for grabs, reinvents of slavery. Get them while they're young, hyper suspension explosions. Where to keep them ignorant, education, give convulsions. Anytime they think about school, they think of trauma. Teachers will share from the disappointment of their mama. Teacher once told them they'll never amount to nothing. That teacher up in the future faces a student, now a gunman. No bad energy. So as far as how this transitions into critical race theory, it's important to understand how policy, how curriculum, education transitions into basically how somebody ends up growing up, the type of careers they can see themselves in, the type of relationships they end up building and developing. And so it's important for the conversation to at least be had, because at the end of the day, there are certain historical elements that are left out due to obvious systemic ideologies and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, having the conversation at least gives students a wider range on how to continue to build out the rest of their lives. So hopefully you guys enjoy the presentation and enjoy.
Thank you, Jonathan. Up next, we have Dr. Christopher Conzen, who will be presenting on critical race theory. Dr. Conzen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Cabrera. That was great. And thank you for setting the tone for no negative energy. Because when I first proposed doing this session, it was about a month and a half ago. And obviously it was already somewhat of a controversial topic, and I had no idea it would just keep snowballing to be even more contentious and controversial while I'm giving this presentation today. So I am slightly nervous at giving it, but I'm gonna do it. Give it my best. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so critical race theory. So who am I and why am I talking about critical race theory? So as the introduction said, my name is Chris Conzen. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the executive director of the Sea Caucus Center and Early College Programs. And I'm also an adjunct in the Higher Education Department of Educational Leadership, Management, and Policy at Seton Hall University. And that I feel is the relevant piece, because that explains a little bit as to why I found myself wanting to talk about this topic today. So full disclosure, I came to learn about critical race theory very late in life. I did not learn about critical race theory in grammar school, in high school, in college, in graduate school, or even in my doctoral program. And it wasn't because anyone banned it from being taught. No, I would say I'm slightly self-taught. I came to discover critical race theory when I was developing a syllabus for a course I was teaching. In the course, I covered a variety of human and more specifically college student development theories, wanting to make sure I had the most up-to-date literature for the students who are a mixture of master's and doctoral students in higher education. Um, I came across some articles and chapters from scholars in higher ed who took what was called a critical race lens to existing student development theories. As the bulk of the existing scholarship, even those that tried to broaden the scope from early theories that focused primarily on the experience of white students, they still did not factor in the role that systemic racism had on the development of students, particularly the students of color. So like any decent academic, I decided to dig deeper, and I worked my way backwards through all the references, and I got to the original source texts to gain at least a rudimentary understanding of critical race theory. Again, full disclosure, I am by no means a scholar of CRT, but I will say with a little bit of confidence, I'm definitely more of a scholar than those who are mostly criticizing critical race theory, especially in our state houses and on TV, because basically I did the reading. I've said a few times, reading and listening to many of the critiques of CRT is like reading a book report by someone who only read the Cliffs Notes, except the person who wrote the Cliffs Notes also didn't read the book. So a third reason I'm the one talking about this. So Natalia, when I first did my run through, said, I should also state that I'm an ally. And that's why I decided to tackle this topic. And I have to admit, I'm a little uncomfortable using the term ally for myself. And I think, the reason for that is I think too many people stop at the word when it should be the actions guiding allyship. And so I try to refer to myself as committed to allyship and dismantling racist structures. And, if other people, if I can get to a point where other people do think I'm an ally and want to call me an ally, then, I feel very honored to have that, but I won't use the term for myself because I always think that there's more work to do. So let's talk about what critical race theory isn't. So it's, first of all, it isn't teaching white people that they're inherently racist. White people are not born racist, just as race is not biological, but rather a social construct. However, white people do inherently benefit from a system that was built by other white people. We may not inherit racism, but we do inherit the privilege that was built 300 years ago and is continuously reinforced, particularly as critical race theory studies reinforced in our laws. It is not an effort to make white people feel guilty about being white. Guilt in and of itself is not productive. As someone who was raised in the Catholic tradition, we had a process called penance. Some of you who are also raised Catholic may understand and recognize that. You would feel guilt for something that you had done, and you could feel genuinely sorry for what caused that guilt. So you would go and you would confess your sin to a priest and have the best of intentions when you went to the priest that you would not do that something again. And then your sins are wiped away. It's tabula rasa. You get a clean slate. But that doesn't stop you from, in fact, doing that again, even though you may have intended not to. Nor, and this is the more important part, does it actually erase the pain you may have caused others. So white guilt often leads to more performative allyship. What really makes a difference is a recognition of your privilege and power, and then, more importantly, using your privilege and power to create meaningful change in a system with the full acceptance that this will lead to you losing your own privilege and power. So it's not an erasure of history. You know, the talking heads love to talk about cancellation. That's another hot topic right now. And how we're engaging in the rewriting of history. And full disclosure, some of what's written in our history books actually does need to be rewritten. But what really needs to happen is actually an expansion. You know, you can kind of tie the start of the critical race theory panic to the release of the 1619 Project. And I'm not here to talk about the merits of the 1619 Project. I think it was, I've read through it. I think it was very well done. I think that there's some legitimate academic critiques, as anything that is published in academia. Nothing is perfect, and everything should be open to critiques because that's what makes it better. But it started some genuine conversations and some also genuine hand-wringing. But one of the most common critiques that came out was that was rewriting U.S. history. But it wasn't. It was filling in the blanks. It was discussing the aspects that have routinely and consistently been left out of our history books. And finally, critical race theory isn't actually taught in grammar schools or even high schools. And so, you know, the uproar that we see from parents specifically, you know, I'd ask them, have their kids ever heard the names Derek Bell or Kimberly Crenshaw? What's being taught in schools is nothing close to actual critical race theory. Now, what they may be taught is to have a fuller understanding of history, but critical race theory itself is not being taught in schools. So, you know, I heard a joke, you know, that if your child is learning critical race theory, congratulations, they're in their second year of law school. Because really that's mostly where most of the scholarship has been with critical race theory. It is legal theory. Now, there have been some offshoots, particularly around education, you know, that happened in the mid-90s. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But critical race theory in and of itself is an advanced discussion, advanced piece of literature that, you know, is not being taught in second grade. So I think that's really important to understand. So why are we talking about critical race theory? As of June 18th, 25 states have introduced bills or taken other steps that would restrict teaching critical race theory or limit how teachers can discuss racism and sexism. So, you know, it's the critical race theory is being used as the red herring. It's being used because, again, like I said before, critical race theory is not being taught in the schools. So banning it really doesn't do anything because it wasn't being taught in the first place, but it's being used to tack in and tack on the second part of that statement, which is limiting how teachers can discuss racism and sexism. And that's what's the really chilling aspect of these movements that are happening in states, because there's a genuine fear among those who want to keep the status quo of what will happen when we have honest discussions about racism and sexism, particularly when we try to reach individuals when before they've made up their minds, before they have come to really accept or take on you know, the beliefs and structures that are given to them by their parents and their family and their other social systems. So there is a real worry from a certain segment of our population when it comes to that. And then 8 states have outright banned the teaching of critical race theory in public schools. So they've just said outright. Again, it's a moot point practically because it wasn't being taught in public schools. But again, what people, the fear is what those people who are banning critical race theory will then package into critical race theory, which is reflected in a lot of the discussions that you see by people who don't understand what critical race theory is. And I thought, so I'm going to play a quick clip. I think this kind of captures, why we are talking about critical race theory and why it's coming up.
The sound is not coming through.
Oh, sorry about that. Video settings. I know that there's something I have to do to.
The bottom left of the share. So you can do a new share on the top bar.
Mm-hmm.
And on the bottom of that big box with all your screens, you'll see 2 check boxes, one for audio. And if you want to do the video one, you can too. But
All right. Oh, there we go. Share computer sound.
Mhm.
Thanks. All right. Let's try this again.
That's really what you're seeing in many ways, because Republicans now by and large are agreeing on a lot of policy issues, especially when you're in the minority. That tends to happen. So therefore, proof of how you're going to be a disruptor and how you're going to be someone who's going to advance a muscular pushback to the left is the first step to check.
Is not having, though, a unified sort of, you say it's sort of, what are the issues that the party stands for, right? That seems to be the missing piece here.
Yeah, and specific to this idea of critical race theory, I have to tell you, I just spent some time reporting on this county in Virginia, about an hour outside of Washington. And to your point, this is something that is mobilizing people and resonating very deeply. It was about a 100-degree day. Dozens and dozens and dozens of parents, mostly white in this largely affluent county, showed up to a school board meeting. For many of them, the very first school board meeting they'd ever attended, specifically because of this one issue.
That's important to note that you mentioned critical race theory a couple times. This is a parent-led backlash at the grassroots level.
It's manufactured.
No,
and
it's completely.
And then sort of
elected
seems to
officials
have been lit. The fire was lit.
I disagree.
Yeah.
I think it started because parents have had it with the education bureaucracy after COVID. They're fed up with it. They tend to trust Democrats when it comes to education funding, but they trust Republicans on education accountability. I think that what the backlash you're seeing on critical race theory in schools is another example of parents trying to hold educators accountable.
It's coordinated, it's aggressive, it's intentional, right? This is part of the tribalism play. The critical race theory is yet another tool in the racial tribal boogeyman's toolbox to drive and inflame tribalism, which Republicans thinks helps them in elections. This is Trump 2.0. This is a continuation of this, right? Critical race theory is an arcane sort of ideal. Why is it front and center right now? The same reason that Mitch McConnell attacked Stacey Abrams when she came out for the voting bill. It is racial. It is tribalism. We've seen it grow under Trump, and this is part and parcel of it. And they think this helps ignite their base. There's no way this is not grassroots. And Brad, you know this is organized and is being paid for.
But, Ashley,
we're not very good at organizing or anything on our side.
Like you all are better than us.
All right. So a primer on critical race theory. So it started formulating in the 1970s. So that's how long critical race theory has been around. From legal scholars of color, most notably Derek Bell, who wanted to understand why civil rights legislation and litigation that purported to eradicate racism did not achieve its goal. And so, again, that led to an understanding that racism was so baked into the law that civil rights legislation was just kind of adding on top rather than undoing. And so that's where this movement started. And then it evolved into what we call critical race theory. The term itself, that was really the invention of Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 80s. Crenshaw, and then furthered by other legal scholars as well. They started discussing this on retreats, and really formulated what we now know as critical race theory. It's a body of analytical tools for examining how race and racism work, specifically as it relates to racism in the law. as well as theorizing actions to combat this racism and how people of color can both navigate through and negotiate change. And you know, I'll just touch on how that has been, that area there is been one of the areas where you've seen some offshoots and tough discussions within the school of thought of critical race theory, because you know that there, you know, the idea that people of color have to have the responsibility to be the ones negotiating the change, you know, it already is placing people of color at a disadvantage because the law is stacked and worked against. So it has to, the real change has to be made by the individuals with the power to make and create the laws. And again, when you look at the representation of our lawmakers, both locally and you know, look at the United States Senate, and you know, you can count on you know, it's a very low count of how many lawmakers of color there are. So most of the literature still largely surrounds racism and the law. It took an offshoot and expanded into education in 1995 by Ladson, Billings, and Tate. Now, it initially focused on the US Civil Rights Movement, but it has branched out into other umbrella areas. One centered around Asian American jurisprudence, another called Latino critical contingent. Then you have those around LGBT causes, and most recently a Muslim and Arab caucus. So there is a collaboration, obviously, between the groups, because the ends, the main ends are the same. However, there's a recognition and impact and understanding that the way that the law has been crafted and used has attacked groups differently. You know, for example, the anti-Asian immigration laws that sprung up in the late 19th century, early 20th century, you know, that targeted a specific group. So in order to really make progress, there was an understanding that there had to be offshoots to focus on those different aspects. So now the basic tenets of critical race theory. So racism is understood as ordinary, not aberrational. Normal science is the term used. The usual way society does business, the common everyday experience of most people of color in this country. So I want to make sure that I over define the word ordinary as it's used here, because you know, when we use the term ordinary, we think of it as very benign. However, it's not in this. What it means by ordinary is that it is so ingrained in our legal structures that it's experienced on a normal basis, on an everyday basis. And so that's what it's become normalized, because we've existed in this structure for so long, people don't know what it is not to have a structure that way. A system of white over color ascendancy that serves important purposes, both psychic and material, for the dominant group. In that, there's two features: ordinariness, which we kind of touched on before. Racism is not actively acknowledged. The idea of the colorblind approaches. So, you know, there's the term the well-meaning white person. So the idea that you may have heard throughout your life, well, why can't we all just be Americans? Why can't we all just be the same? You know, why do we have to stratify? When you've heard people push back against Black Lives Matter, they, you know, well, all lives matter. Why do we have to separate out? And obviously that does more damage, because to say that everybody is equal ignores the fact that the laws have stacked the benefits, and so unless we dig deep and attack those pieces, then, you know, saying just making an overall declaration, you know, let's just not look at race, let's just treat everybody the same, largely ignores the reality that exists. Interest convergence, because racism advances interests of both white elites and white working class, little incentive among dominant group to eradicate. And that's an important piece too. You know, you see that, and I'm going to use parties here, you know, just for an example, but we know that there's issues with every political party. but we've seen Democrats, for example, advance more causes that would seem to be more beneficial to people in the lower and middle class. And however, white Republicans still push back against that, because there's an understanding that even if they are not in the economic elite, they still share the benefits of being part of the overall white dominant group. And so there is more of a self-interest to preserve that dynamic, even if it's at a detriment to the self. And then, of course, we touched upon this earlier, social construction. Races are categories that society invents, manipulates, or retires when convenient. So race is not baked into our DNA. Race has been created, and it's often created by the dominant groups who get to decide who's in what race. So I'm going to take a little side note because most of us, I assume, in this room today, are work with college students in some way, shape, or form. So I wanted to talk a little bit about critical race theory and its intersection with student development theory. So educators, including scholars and practitioners, often obscure the influence of racism in student development. And as I mentioned early on, the way that I came to understand critical race theory is because there was a recognition that years and years of scholarship and research on how students in college develop largely ignored the impact that racism had on students of color and also on white students as well, and ignored how that played into all college students' development. Researchers, scholars, practitioners often do not name the role of racism in the lives of students of color. Like I said, it's ignored in the literature. It is not included as a part of how a student may develop, how a student may move between and up stages. If you read through your stage theories and your life theories, you'll particularly in student development, you will not read much about how race is a part of that until you get to the very most recent theoretical work. Racism, including institutionalized racism, is often not viewed as significant in students' developmental processes, racial and otherwise. Scholars must connect students' collegiate experiences to the ways in which racism always operates and influences individuals' developmental process. As I discussed before with the ordinariness, this is where the ordinary intersects here. The fact that it is an everyday occurrence, scholars have to name that because it is real and it impacts everybody. It impacts our students of color mostly, but it also impacts white students, not negatively, but it impacts in a way that when you're in a system that is grounded on white supremacy and systemic racism, it reinforces certain beliefs and it normalizes it so that you don't think that you have privilege or that you are benefiting from those systems. And like I said, racism influences the development of all individuals on campus, including white students. There's been debate over the idea of college being a safe space, but for whom is it really a safe space? And in our desire to create these quote unquote safe spaces, we may actually be counterproductive, as it may dull the impact on white students in understanding the role of privilege and the benefits they receive from institutional racism. We sometimes go only so far because we want to be developmental, and we think that being developmental means providing safety, but we may be not pushing where we need to be pushing in a role to get individuals to understand the privilege that they carry. So why now? So you see, from a policy perspective, more people in this country are embracing ideas and policies that, normally are associated with what we call the left or progressive. The usual dog whistles of how progressive policies will mean a descent into Soviet Union style communism have not carried the same weight as they used to. You know, you've seen marijuana initiatives in what are some people will call red states. You see minimum wage. Florida, you know, voted on an increase in minimum wage. We've seen Medicaid expansion, even when it's had to be done by ballot initiative from the citizenry. And, you know, we've seen how many people have come to rely on aspects of the ACA. So there is an embracing of some of these more, the quote unquote, progressive initiatives. The suburban vote in 2020, we saw a shift from a 1.2 million vote advantage for Trump to 613,000 for Biden. Now, of course, the 613,000 doesn't look as big, but when you consider the shift from 1.2 million all the way to the other side of 613,000, you know, that suburban, particularly the suburban white vote, is considered a swing vote. And it is something that both parties are heavily trying to pursue. Majority approval rating for Biden and for key policy initiatives, although some of the most recent polls have that dipping. But infrastructure, expansion of the child tax credit, tax increases on corporations and high earners, particularly those we've seen poll very high, some ways in the high 60%. So again, we're seeing, you know, people who are embracing, again, what can be considered quote unquote progressive policies. And it's been real, and you know, the right has had a very difficult time pinning many things on Biden, making him a boogeyman. You know, he's relatively safe in those terms, you know, partially because he's an older white male. So it's just been difficult to make him into a true enemy. So, and I thought that this tweet I found was really spoke to it. We need to quit conceding that critical race theory is being taught in public schools. Conservatives do this thing where they redefine words and then people use those definitions as if they are accurate. We got to stop doing that. If your kid is learning CRT, your kid is in law and grad school. So essentially, you know, conservatives from a political perspective are losing the policy battles. So we're now leaning more into the quote unquote culture wars. And you probably hear that term used quite a bit, you know, whether it's holding up Dr. Seuss books, you know, or now again, the 1619 Project to critical race theory. It is a convenient word and a convenient phrase because it exists. It's not made up. Critical race theory is a real thing. It's just the way that it's being used as something to attack is disingenuous. But it is a good rallying cry. You know, while we've gotten some more overt actions, such as maybe you remember the short-lived Anglo-Saxon caucus that was suggested by a couple of members of Congress, you know, the rest of the movements have been more nuanced, coding white supremacy into terms such as patriotism and election integrity, and, you know, and of course, cancel culture. So that has meant that critical race theory has become the latest boogeyman because it plays well in the media. So what is next? Well, first of all, do the reading. You know, it really, and not Wikipedia either. I'm going to share at the end, and I will share a link to a reference list that I developed. It is not an exhaustive list, but you can do what anybody who's written a dissertation does. You know, you read your article and then you comb through every single work cited and go find those as well and build up your lit review. So you can do the same thing with some of the readings that I'm going to share at the end. You know, it's really important to do the reading and get a grasp on what critical race theory actually is. You don't need to plan to teach divisive topics. So this is another discussion that has been popular. You know, we're trying to avoid divisive topics. Actual history is already divisive enough. All you have to do is start with a conversation on the US Constitution, and you'll find it baked right in there. You know, again, critical race theory came about because of a basic understanding that through the history of this country, racism was written directly into laws, and you do not need to go hunting or interpret that. It's right there. You You've got the 3/5 compromise, the codification of slavery, the except for punishment addition to the 13th Amendment. Then you have local laws and Supreme Court rulings. You've got segregation, separate but equal. You have gerrymandering, the loss of voting rights after incarceration. Close to home, you have the history of redlining and the impact that has had on generational wealth and the ability to build generational wealth. And then, it's still a debate right to this moment is the different punishments for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. For the same amount of each, yet crack cocaine has harsher penalties than powder cocaine. So you have all of these aspects that are real, that don't have to be made up. And you just have to be able to talk about it and present it. And then you're getting into the aspect of what some people will call divisive topics. But, the founders themselves were very divisive. And then, I conclude with aspiring to allyship. I think it's something that, like I said, I'm trying to do every day. But it's something that I call, and I'm specifically calling out myself, identify, I'm a cis white male. And so people like me, when we sit at the table, and then have a voice at that table by virtue of the privilege that goes along with our identities, we have an obligation to use those, that access to push for change. And we have to accept and be willing to be uncomfortable with the fact that real absolute change will mean a loss of privilege. And that is always the hump. When you look at pointing back to student development theory, there's a plateau in white student development that they talk about, that, even the most well-meaning of individuals tend to stop at the point where creating change would mean a loss of privilege. It would mean a loss of something for themselves. And so that is what we have to be willing to do in order to move forward. So I said that I would change, I would share so obviously I'm showing this to you now, but I also did create a shared doc, which I'll share at the end because it's behind my PowerPoint, so I can't copy the link and paste it into the chat until I'm done with this. But so this is the first half, and you see the Bell and the Crenshaw. I also included a couple of things that I used that I referenced here in the PowerPoint. I took those out of the critical race reading list because those were just some recent news articles. And that's part 2. Like I said, not an exhaustive list, but a good place to start. And with that, I open up to questions, comments, and it doesn't have to be a question for me. If it's something that people want to, put out for some discussion amongst ourselves, because we have some very smart people in this virtual room here. So, the floor is open.
Jonathan?
Hey, Chris, you definitely was not nervous. You killed it. You definitely did an excellent job. Your examples were spot on. The 13th Amendment, the 3/5 of a man. And these are examples that anybody that wants to learn about it can easily access. The only excuse to not know about it is that you don't want to know about it at this point, especially with the internet being so accessible. Social media, you run across information. Like if you have social media, you run across information that you didn't even mean to run into. And especially when things are trending, it's like you're going to come into contact with this information at some point. But I think you said something very important at the end, which is, and this is just human nature, right? It's survival of the fittest, right? This is kind of part of the, biological traits that we also have as people, that we always want to put ourselves in the best position to thrive and to survive, right? So, that's going to be the hard decision that a lot of people got to make. Am I willing to give up my privilege? Am I willing to give up the thing that, whether I want to admit it or not, has differentiated me and allowed me to scale up to wherever I'm at. And I think that question, when you know, that statement when you posed it was subtle, but it was powerful, because it's like, you know, in me looking to help another group of people out, now I'm potentially taking leverage away from myself, right? And as people, we always want leverage. We always put ourselves in the best position to get to wherever we need to get to in life. But that's a leverage that obviously, you know, has come under a lot of fire for valid reasons. So I'm definitely thankful that you brought these points up and that you conveyed it very eloquently, to say the least.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Can you all hear me, see me? As I would say to my students, can you hear me, see me, thumbs me up? But I saw Ruth and many others thumbs up. Very quickly, I was so glad that this conversation has been had. Thank you so much, Dr. Kanzan, for your persistence and continuing the efforts to share on this critical and nationwide or nationwide topic. And someone stated in the chat, hot topics to be exact. And I just hear the phone. I'm so sorry about that, y'all. But I just wanted to touch bases when you said that we all, or in your eloquent, as Jonathan had said, in your eloquent, your presentation, you stated to dig deep or deep dive and attack the pieces. And so that's exactly what you have done today. You have actually delved, you did the research, you mentioned in your disclosure that you are not a scholar in this, but you have done the reading, you've done the research. And, I had looked up some information in terms of this even before, seeing it today as an event that you're doing. And
Royal, you accidentally
Royal, you
muted
muted yourself.
sorry, I'm looking, right, hold on. Okay, yes. So the gentleman name, in terms of what I researched, and this was like last month, his name is Stephen Sawchik, and the article came out on Education Week, which is a website, Education Week, May 18th, 2021. And it's a 10-minute read. And it's basically, his topic was, what is critical race theory and why is it under attack? And you laid it out. You laid out the tenets, you laid out all of the information as Jonathan has referenced and stated, and I can attest in terms of you did your research, basically. If anybody wants to know what it is and they do the research, they'll find out. But if they don't want to know, it's because they don't want to know, right? And so that's not me to judge anyone else. But I just want to attest, you did a great job. You started out saying you was a little nervous, but let me tell you, you did absolutely wonderful, and I'm just so more inspired by your work and even by the DR in front of your name, because that's going to be me pretty soon, hopefully anyway. And Jonathan, I loved your poem. Oh my God, you were so awesome, amazing. But again, I'm going to cut off or stop showing my camera because I got to answer these phones. Stay be helpful. Thank you. But excellent, Dr. Kanzan, excellent.
I thought that I have, as I hear of different, board meetings and parents complaining. Oh, Eurus, I'm sorry, you raised your hand. I cut in front of you. You go.
Very, very briefly, I want to thank everyone behind the organization and execution of this program. I just wanted to provide a little bit of an example. I grew up in a very poor, rural town in the Dominican Republic. And, this brings the concept of the other, tribalism, and essentially how we identify and who we are and who's the other. And I remember that I grew up in La Colonia, and there was another town called La Bombita, literally translated to the bomb, like the little bomb. And we hated each other, them and us, Then, and that's me being a kid, when you get a little older, He's like, no, we're all part of ASWA. But those people from Barahona, they're different people. That's like a different situation there. And then you get to elaborate more. It's like, no, we're all part of this country. We're all the same. But then you start looking externally. And, if you trace back the history of countries, the history of tribalism, nationalism, that's kind of like what you get, And I think that all of us should aspire, as much as possible, to expand the borders of our tribe as much as we can, right? To include more, because as you mentioned, and the point that I'll take from this is that race, the concept of race is a social construct. Before the breakout, when the world, based on a lot of the literature that we have, when you looked at Europe, the difference was all those Germans and those Italians and those, they were all different. But then as the world got bigger, then the concept of the other changed and so on, So I think that we have a responsibility to look at all those things and try to kind of expand the border, and that we're sharing this world. But just wanted to share that. And this was excellent. Thank you.
As I watch the different board meetings or the education meetings that are happening and parents coming out and all the crazy things that are being said, I think about how this could potentially change our history education. And I know a lot of us in what we learned in school is not as a very, specific teaching of what either that school allows or that textbook allows or that teacher believes. Is there hope that this could lead to a little bit more of expanded history education? I mean, I haven't been in K through 12 in a little while. I'm not sure what's happening in history classes, but I do know I tend to feel like I sometimes learn more from social media about our history and from my friends and people around me than what I learned in school.
One of the things I mentioned, and this is where I think the real concern is that critical race theory is being used as the smoke shield to get at the kinds of things you're talking about, Veronica, is that to really exert more control over curriculum and what's taught on those levels, because they know that the critical race theory isn't being taught, but what they can do is scare enough people into using, again, that smoke screen into getting at whatever group is in charge decides are the divisive topics. And I think about the Texas curriculum changes that they were talking about to talk about Texan pride. They also had a number to that. I'm sorry, I don't remember the date of Texas's. Maybe I think Allison may know the date of when Texas became a republic or a state. But they to think about that, those are the routes that we're going down. I mean, heck, I was thinking about what we had with this whole Columbus Day piece in New Jersey. I happen to live right next to that, to Randolph. And my sister is a teacher there. So I've had a kind of a front row seat to what's going on. And my local assembly member used the occasion to send an email. I subscribe to the newsletter because I need to know what's going on. And it was talking about how this is a reminder that we need more transparency and input into what's taught in our schools. And that sent a chill, because it's the coded language that is being used to say, we want to make sure only certain things are taught in our schools. And so, I think that's, your point brings that up for us.
I have a question, and I guess a remark as well. My name is Danielle Walker. I'm a student, but I'm also a parent advocate, and I have children in the Jersey City Public Schools. And what I've noticed, seeing my children have their history classes, the content that they have to study, it seems as if it's the same information that is regurgitated year after year after year. And my kids are 4 years apart. So looking at that span of, the same information is just quite bothersome. And so talking to fellow parent advocates, just last night, we were talking about what are our next steps to mobilize more parents and get them to board meetings and just to sort of, have conversations with school administrators just to see what can be changed and what can be implemented, so that, children that are non-white, but every child, regardless of race or ethnicity, can understand that American history is not just white history, and that, contributions have been made throughout centuries, to make America what it is. And history is present. Last year I was offered a training, and I learned about the Amistad curriculum, and it blew my mind how much, I just was not made aware of, until late in my adulthood. So I don't want our children today to, have the same repetition of finding out things later on in life. I think the time is now for that to happen. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what could we do as community members to sort of organize and just demand full accountability and transparency to the education system as a whole, that this is necessary. Jersey City prides itself on being the most diverse city in the state. But, when you look at what our kids are learning, there's no diversity in that.
Do we have anybody who's been involved in that kind of activity who can speak to that, who can give some better advice than I would be able to?
Daniela, are you asking where you can get the curriculum, or how do you change the curriculum for K-12?
How could we change it? How could we change the trajectory of what is continuously being taught, and how can we supplement, not to take away the important parts of history that's being taught now, but instead of the consistent regurgitation, just to add something that, just offers more equity and space for people of color to appreciate.
I think it's it's a multi-part step, but I think your first step is all the school systems, all the districts are required to have their curriculums available to any of the parents or any of the community. So you can request whatever curriculum you want to see, and they'll show you for the school year or for the K-12 system what they are teaching and what standards they're meeting. So that would be, I would think, the first step. And then exactly what you're doing is trying to go to the Board of Trustees meeting or the Board of Ed meetings and ask your questions and bring it forwards and get some like-minded people together that, these are our concerns. We've looked at the curriculum and this doesn't match what we should be doing. It's not reflective of who we are as a community. It's not reflective of our values, our standards, our goals. And I would kind of start with what they're doing and then where you want to move to, if that helps at all.
Yes, thanks.
Hey, Danielle. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I agree with Allison. I used to work in the public schools for a long time, and parents are very powerful. If enough parents get together and want change, you can make it happen, following Allison's suggestions, because the children are your children that are going to these schools. So it just can't be one or two. It would have to be an entire, group, but you can make change. So just keep doing what you're doing. And if, they hear you enough at these board meetings, and, it might happen, because it needs to happen. I think what's happening in the public schools, I can attest to as a teacher, and Chris was right. You have to follow the curriculum when you teach in these schools, unfortunately. And I think what's missing is our children early on need to be taught. I know the parents do it, but they need to be taught in the school system about respecting other people. It doesn't matter what color of their skin, what the color of their skin is, what religion they are. And I think that's missing as part of the curriculum in the school system. So there should be courses designed to help students as they're growing up, because get them while they're young, because their brains are developing and they develop values early on in life. So keep doing what you're doing. It's great work.
Thank you. Yeah, well, after this meeting, we have to go to support one of our parent advocates at the MUA, because we're still fighting for clean water in the schools, and to have, all of these schools serviced by September. So, something as simple as having a basic right to clean water has been, it's been a fight that we've been involved in for since 2018, and now it's 2021, and all schools still don't have clean potable water. So I could imagine, what this is going to look like in the years to come. But yeah, I'm in it for the long haul. So I do thank you for that support.
You're welcome.
So I know there's some of us in this meeting who have to switch over our screens to a 3 p.m. So and that includes me. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today, and with bringing the positive energy, no negative energy, if anybody wants to chat about this afterwards, please do reach out to me, and just keep these conversations going, and keep attending these programs that are being sponsored by PACT. Thanks.